In the summer of 1885, federal investigators arrived at what should have been the thriving mining town of Quicksilver Creek, Texas. Instead, they found empty streets and abandoned homes, with a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. What they would discover in the abandoned mine shafts would haunt the U.S. Geological Survey for decades to come. Detailed medical records documented the systematic poisoning of over 300 men, women, and children. All were signed by 7 brothers, whose names would be quietly erased from official records. The Kruger family had turned an entire community into their personal laboratory, conducting experiments on mercury poisoning. The scientific data they produced was so advanced mainstream medicine wouldn't understand it for another 50 years. Yet their methods were so horrific that no university would acknowledge their findings. No medical journal would publish their research, and no government agency would admit the studies ever existed. The brothers themselves vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their meticulous notes and a question that still echoes through medical institutions today. How far is too far in the name of scientific progress? Before we continue with the story of the Kruger brothers and their deadly experiments, I want you to know this tale comes from recently declassified documents found in a Texas state archive. If you're fascinated by dark historical mysteries like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these forgotten stories. Please let me know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. I love connecting with fellow mystery enthusiasts from around the world. What the investigators found that day would challenge everything they thought they knew about human cruelty disguised as scientific inquiry. The year 1885 found the American West in the throes of unprecedented expansion. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed 16 years prior, and ambitious men with sharp minds and sharper business instincts were carving fortunes from the untamed Texas landscape. Into this world of opportunity and exploitation arrived Heinrich Kruger and his 6 brothers from the industrial valleys of Prussia. They carried with them not just the calloused hands of experienced miners, but university educations that set them apart from typical frontier prospectors. Heinrich, the eldest at 42, had studied metallurgy at the University of Berlin before political troubles forced the family to immigrate. His brothers, Friedrich, Wilhelm, Otto, Gustav, Bernhard, and young Klaus, each possessed specialized knowledge that would prove invaluable. Friedrich had training in chemistry, Wilhelm in engineering, Otto in medicine, Gustav in mathematics, Bernhard in geology, and Klaus, despite being only 24, had apprenticed in the dangerous mercury mines of Almaden, Spain. The brothers settled in what would become Quicksilver Creek, a natural depression in the Texas Hill Country where Bernhard's geological surveys had indicated the presence of cinnabar, mercury sulfide ore. The location was strategic, isolated enough to avoid unwanted attention, yet connected by a rough trail to the railroad depot in Junction, some 30 miles southeast. More importantly, it sat near several established routes used by migrant workers moving between mining operations throughout the Southwest. Within months of their arrival, the Kruger operation had attracted over 200 workers and their families. The brothers offered wages generous by frontier standards, $2 a day, plus housing and medical care. This last benefit, provided personally by Otto Kruger with his medical training, proved a powerful draw for men whose dangerous profession left them vulnerable to injury and illness. The town that grew around the mine reflected the brothers' methodical German sensibilities. Unlike the chaotic boom towns that typically sprouted around mining operations, Quicksilver Creek was laid out in orderly blocks. The Kruger compound sat on elevated ground overlooking the settlement, a collection of well-built structures that included their residence, Otto's medical clinic, Friedrich's laboratory for ore analysis, and a substantial office building where Wilhelm maintained detailed engineering records. What set the Kruger operation apart, however, was not just its organization, but its revolutionary approach to mercury extraction. Traditional methods involved heating cinnabar ore in furnaces, causing the mercury to vaporize and then condense in cooling chambers. The process was notoriously dangerous, as workers were inevitably exposed to mercury vapor, a neurotoxin that accumulated in the body over time, causing tremors, tooth loss, kidney damage, and eventually madness. The brothers claimed to have developed safer extraction methods. Indeed, workers noticed the Kruger operation produced less visible vapor than other mercury mines. What they didn't realize was that Heinrich and his brothers had simply become more efficient at capturing and concentrating the mercury, not to protect their workers, but to control their exposure with scientific precision. Otto Kruger had established his medical practice in Quicksilver Creek with the stated purpose of monitoring worker health and treating mining-related injuries. He maintained detailed files on every resident of the town, documenting their medical history, family background, and any symptoms they might develop. To the workers and their families, Dr. Otto seemed like a godsend, a qualified physician who provided free medical care. The reality was far more sinister. Otto was conducting the most comprehensive study of mercury poisoning ever attempted, using an entire community as his test subjects. His brothers had designed the mining operation not for maximum profit, but for maximum control over mercury exposure levels. Different work areas had different concentrations of mercury vapor. Different shifts were exposed for precisely calculated durations, and workers were rotated through various positions according to a complex schedule only the brothers understood. By the spring of 1885, several disturbing patterns had emerged in Quicksilver Creek, though the isolated nature of the community meant few outsiders were aware. Workers began displaying symptoms of mercury poisoning much more rapidly than was typical. More puzzling still, these symptoms seemed to follow distinct patterns. Some men developed severe tremors while maintaining their mental faculties. Others showed cognitive decline while remaining physically capable. Still others experienced a progression of symptoms that seemed almost designed to test the limits of human endurance. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came not from the mine itself, but from the town's children. On the morning of May 15, 1885, Margaret Donnelly was hanging laundry when she noticed her 8-year-old son Thomas behaving strangely. The boy was walking in perfect circles, his arms rigid at his sides, his eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. When she called his name, he didn't respond. When she touched his shoulder, he continued his circular path as if she weren't there. Margaret wasn't alone in her discovery. Across Quicksilver Creek, mothers were finding their children engaged in similar repetitive behaviors. Some walked in straight lines, turning precisely when they reached a wall. Others stood motionless for hours, their hands moving in complex patterns. Most disturbing of all, the children seemed unaware of their own actions. Dr. Otto Kruger was summoned immediately. He arrived at the Donnelly home carrying his black medical bag and wearing an expression of professional concern. He examined Thomas with a thoroughness that impressed Margaret. After nearly an hour, he pronounced that the boy was suffering from a minor nervous condition, probably brought on by spring weather and too much rich food. Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Donnelly, he assured her in his careful, German-accented English. I'll prepare a tonic that should have young Thomas back to normal within a few days. But Otto Kruger had not seen this before. He had created it. The children of Quicksilver Creek were displaying the first visible symptoms of a carefully orchestrated experiment. The brothers had discovered that mercury accumulated differently in developing nervous systems, and they had been systematically studying these effects by introducing controlled amounts of mercury dust into the town's flour supply, provided free to all residents. The tonic that Otto prepared for Thomas Donnelly contained not medicine, but a precisely measured dose of mercury compounds designed to accelerate symptom progression. In his private laboratory, Otto recorded detailed observations, the exact timing of symptom onset, the specific nature of the repetitive behaviors. This information was carefully catalogued alongside similar data from dozens of other children. What made Otto's records particularly valuable, and particularly horrifying, was their comprehensive nature. The Kruger experiment provided a complete picture of mercury's effects on human subjects from initial exposure through final stages. The brothers had created conditions allowing them to observe and document every phase with scientific precision. As days passed, the children's symptoms intensified. Parents became increasingly alarmed as their sons and daughters began losing weight, developing tremors, and showing cognitive impairment. Some children stopped speaking entirely, communicating only through elaborate hand gestures. Others became hypersensitive to light and sound. The adult population was experiencing its own health crisis, though the symptoms were more familiar. Men developed tremors in their hands. Some complained of painful, rapid tooth decay. Others reported memory problems and sudden outbursts of anger. What the workers didn't know was that their symptoms were not unfortunate byproducts of dangerous work, but the intended result of a carefully controlled experiment. The Kruger brothers had divided the workforce into test groups, exposing different men to different concentrations of mercury vapor over precisely timed intervals. Wilhelm's engineering expertise allowed them to create work areas with exact contamination levels, while Gustav's mathematical training enabled optimal exposure rate calculations. Heinrich Kruger maintained overall coordination, ensuring each subject received the intended dose. The goal was not to kill their test subjects, but to study the complete progression of mercury poisoning under controlled conditions. Death would end the experiment prematurely. The brothers wanted to observe every stage. As autumn approached, the true scope began revealing itself in ways even the brothers hadn't anticipated. The mercury poisoning created complex interactions within the closed community. Families disintegrated as mercury-induced personality changes turned loving spouses into strangers and responsible parents into erratic caregivers. James McReynolds, a foreman, exemplified the devastating progression. A steady, reliable man, he began experiencing explosive rage without warning. During one episode, he destroyed most of his home's furniture, then spent the following day meticulously repairing each piece while his terrified family watched from a neighbor's house. Otto Kruger documented these behavioral changes with detached precision. His records described McReynolds as Subject 47. Significant deterioration in impulse control. Recommended increase to exposure level C3 to accelerate progression. The brothers had developed their own classification system. Stage A showed minor symptoms. Stage B had more pronounced neurological issues. Stage C involved severe cognitive impairment. Most chilling was Stage D, reserved for subjects deemed ready for terminal observation. These individuals were provided special housing for detailed study of final stages without interference. By late 1885, nearly half the adult population had progressed to Stage B or beyond. The town had become a place of whispered conversations and barely controlled fear. Workers avoided each other, uncertain whether friends might suffer violent episodes. The children were progressing through their own documented stages. Many stopped attending school. Those who did attend were often unable to focus. Their teacher, Mrs. Elizabeth Hoffman, struggled to maintain order in a classroom filled with children whose minds were being systematically destroyed. Mrs. Hoffman herself was not immune. As one of the town's few educated residents, she had been assigned to what Otto designated Group E, educational subjects whose intellectual capacities were being monitored. Her daily rations included precisely measured mercury-contaminated flour. She began noticing changes in her own mental processes, difficulty remembering lessons, confusion about simple mathematics, losing track of time. What made the Kruger experiment particularly insidious was the brothers' understanding of community psychology. They structured their study to take advantage of Quicksilver Creek's isolation. When everyone experiences cognitive decline simultaneously, those changes begin to seem normal. The brothers reinforced this through careful information manipulation. Mail delivery was handled through the Kruger office, allowing monitoring and interception. Visitors were discouraged through rumors of infectious disease. Heinrich Kruger maintained detailed records of social and psychological dimensions as well. His journals described the breakdown of social structures and the effectiveness of various control techniques. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't become more disturbing, the brothers introduced Phase 2. This began in December 1885 with the arrival of what appeared to be a medical supply wagon, but actually contained specialized equipment Heinrich had ordered. The brothers announced they had secured additional medical professionals. Dr. Otto introduced his new colleagues, 3 men who wore white coats and carried professional authority, but whose credentials were forged by Wilhelm. These were not doctors, but actors hired to provide legitimacy. The fake physicians established a treatment center in the former community hall. Residents were scheduled for appointments based on their progression, with the most severely affected receiving priority. What they didn't realize was that these treatments were designed not to cure, but to study effects under more controlled conditions. The center contained impressive equipment, examination tables with restraining mechanisms, apparatus for measuring reflexes, devices for administering controlled doses. The brothers had spared no expense in creating a human laboratory, funded by mercury sales and payments from European universities interested in their data. These university connections were perhaps the most disturbing aspect. Through correspondence networks established during their German education, the brothers had contacted medical researchers in Berlin, Vienna, and Edinburgh. These researchers, working within ethical constraints, had been unable to conduct comprehensive controlled studies. Friedrich Krüger served as primary correspondent, translating data into academic language. The institutions receiving this information were told it came from a private medical practice on the American frontier where regulatory oversight was minimal. The European researchers, hungry for data, asked few questions. They published papers based on the brothers' research, catapulting their careers while remaining willfully ignorant of the human cost. Meanwhile, in Quicksilver Creek, the treatment center produced horrifying results. Subjects often emerged in worse condition. The brothers were using these sessions to test various compounds and procedures. One of their most disturbing discoveries was that certain combinations of mercury compounds, administered in precise sequences, could produce specific neurological damage while leaving other brain functions intact. The children were not exempt. Otto had established a special program ostensibly providing educational support. In reality, it involved psychological testing, experimental treatments, and monitored exposure to determine effects on developing nervous systems. Young Thomas Donnelly had progressed through several stages. By December 1885, the boy showed severe cognitive impairment, spoke only in single words, and had developed a pronounced tremor. Rather than providing treatment, Otto was using Thomas to test theories about reversibility of mercury damage in young subjects. Margaret Donnelly had also been affected. When she expressed concern, Dr. Krüger assured her Thomas was showing signs of improvement. This manipulation of families was crucial. By managing information and exploiting cognitive effects on relatives, they maintained their experiment even as subjects became incapacitated. As winter deepened, the isolation became more complete. Heavy rains made the trail to Junction nearly impossible. The brothers used this seasonal isolation to implement the most extreme phases. They began terminal studies, detailed observations of subjects in final stages, conducted in a special facility. This facility, which residents were told was a hospital, was actually a death house for studying subjects during their final weeks or months. It was designed with observation areas for continuous monitoring and stations for post-mortem examinations. But even as they prepared for culmination, the brothers realized their activities might not remain secret. Federal interest in mining operations was increasing. They began taking precautions. The first indication came in February 1886 when Territorial Health Inspector Dr. Samuel Patterson attempted to visit. Dr. Patterson never made it. His horse was found grazing beside the trail, while the doctor had vanished. Hinrich made no official report, but his private journals contain observations of subject terminal external, a man who died from acute mercury poisoning after consuming contaminated water. Dr. Patterson's disappearance prompted additional inquiries, but the brothers were prepared. Wilhelm had created false records. Friedrich had prepared samples showing normal contamination levels. Most importantly, Otto had coached residents on how to respond. The coaching process revealed the full extent of mercury poisoning's effects on cognitive abilities. Many residents could no longer remember their lives before Quicksilver Creek. Others had difficulty distinguishing between actual experiences and false memories Otto had implanted. The brothers had created a population of witnesses who could not provide accurate testimony. By spring 1886, nearly the entire population showed signs of advanced mercury poisoning. The brothers had achieved their goal, but now faced concealing evidence while preserving research data. Hinrich began implementing the final protocol, a systematic plan for eliminating traces while ensuring scientific findings would survive. Phase 1 involved relocating the most severely affected subjects to the isolated hospital facility, ostensibly for specialized care, actually to concentrate terminal subjects for final observations while preparing for witness elimination. Phase 2 involved destruction of physical evidence, dismantling specialized equipment, burning incriminating medical records, removing traces of mercury contamination systems. Friedrich's chemistry expertise proved invaluable for neutralizing contamination. Phase 3 was most chilling. The brothers determined their experiment could not be discovered. They began systematically eliminating the most severely affected subjects using methods that would appear as natural deaths from mercury poisoning, actually carefully administered overdoses. Otto handled the elimination process, using precise dosages that would cause rapid death while leaving tissue damage patterns consistent with advanced mercury poisoning. Each death was documented with immediate post-mortem examinations to preserve tissue samples. By summer 1886, the population had been reduced from over 300 to fewer than 50. The brothers explained these departures as voluntary relocations. In reality, most had died and been buried in unmarked graves. The survivors were primarily individuals showing unusual resistance, subjects whose characteristics made them valuable for extended study. Klaus Kruger, the youngest brother, began expressing doubts. As the body count mounted, he argued for ending the experiment and fleeing. Heinrich rejected his concerns, arguing they were on the verge of completing the most important medical research of the century. But external pressures were mounting. The territorial government dispatched a more senior investigator with federal marshals. On the morning of August 15, 1886, Deputy U.S. Marshal William Harris arrived with a warrant to search for evidence related to Dr. Patterson's disappearance. The town that greeted Marshal Harris bore little resemblance to the thriving community of 2 years earlier. Most houses stood empty. The few residents encountered appeared severely ill, trembling, hollow-eyed individuals confused by simple questions. At the Kruger compound, the brothers received investigators with calm courtesy. Heinrich presented permits and records appearing in perfect order. Wilhelm provided engineering surveys. Friedrich offered extraction demonstrations. Otto stood ready to explain medical problems as predictable mining hazards. But Marshal Harris was not easily deceived. The condition of survivors, the absence of so many people, and the brothers' unnaturally calm demeanor suggested secrets beyond a missing inspector. The breakthrough came when Harris discovered Otto's treatment center. Despite cleanup efforts, investigators found medical instruments with no legitimate purpose, chemical apparatus for experiments, and, most damning, fragments of record books Otto thought he had destroyed. The partial records revealed the true scope. Page after page documented systematic poisoning of hundreds, manipulation of exposure levels, and cold scientific monitoring of human suffering. Investigators realized they were looking at evidence of the most comprehensive medical experiment ever conducted on unwilling subjects. Friedrich attempted to explain the records as research conducted with full consent. Heinrich presented correspondence with European universities as evidence of legitimate study. But the marshals had discovered too much. In the isolated hospital facility, they found bodies of subjects who had died during final phases, some still on examination tables. In surrounding hills, they uncovered unmarked graves. Most horrifying was the discovery of living subjects in terminal stages, including children as young as 6, reduced to barely functioning shells. They also found evidence of connections to European universities. Correspondence revealed data had been shared with institutions in Germany, Austria, and Scotland. The international implications were staggering. When confronted with overwhelming evidence, the brothers' responses revealed distinct personalities. Heinrich remained defiant, arguing their research would ultimately save thousands. Wilhelm focused on technical aspects, insisting methods were scientifically sound. Friedrich emphasized international significance. Otto showed no remorse, expressing frustration that investigation had interrupted his work. Only Klaus showed conscience, admitting he had tried to convince his brothers to end the experiment. The federal investigators faced an unprecedented dilemma. The evidence documented crimes of such magnitude that prosecution would require years-long trials attracting international attention. More troubling was the realization that the brothers' research represented genuine medical advances. The decision was made in Washington. In September 1886, a team arrived with orders to conduct a complete assessment and recommend a course serving national interest while preventing similar atrocities. The assessment team included medical experts from Johns Hopkins, legal advisors from the Department of Justice, and intelligence officers concerned with preventing foreign access to research data. After 2 weeks, they reached a conclusion shaping the official response. The brothers' research was too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous for public legal proceedings. Their data about mercury poisoning was decades ahead of contemporary knowledge, information crucial for protecting American workers. Yet revealing methods would create international scandals damaging American prestige. The solution became known as the Quicksilver Protocol, a plan for preserving research while ensuring knowledge of methods remained classified indefinitely. First, surviving subjects were relocated to a federal medical facility in Colorado with new identities and cover stories. None were ever allowed to speak publicly. Second, the brothers were given a choice between prosecution for mass murder and cooperation with government research. Heinrich, Wilhelm, Friedrich, and Otto accepted positions with a classified military research division. Klaus was offered exile to South America. The brothers who accepted government positions were relocated to a remote Nevada facility, continuing research under federal supervision. Their work contributed to advances in military medicine and chemical warfare defense, though never attributed to their real names. Third, the research data was preserved and classified at highest levels. Records became part of a larger database about chemical and biological agents, invaluable during both World Wars and the Cold War. Medical researchers were given access to selected portions, never told of origins. The town itself was systematically erased. Buildings were dismantled, graves relocated, mine shafts sealed. Maps were altered, railroad records modified. The land was transferred to federal ownership. Perhaps most chillingly, the federal government used the case as a model for future covert research programs. Techniques the brothers developed became part of the operational manual for classified projects. The Quicksilver Protocol was refined and applied to numerous other cases. European universities faced difficult decisions when quietly informed of true origins. Most chose to suppress publications and destroy records. A few attempted investigations, but were discouraged through diplomatic pressure. The survivors spent remaining years in federal custody. Though provided excellent medical care, they were never allowed to leave, contact relatives, or tell their stories. Margaret Donnelly lived until 1923 in the Colorado facility. Her mercury poisoning caused permanent memory damage, preventing coherent testimony. Thomas Donnelly survived until 1891, studied by government researchers until his death. The four brothers continued research for nearly 2 decades. Heinrich died in 1903. Wilhelm survived until 1912. Friedrich and Otto lived into the 1920s. Klaus disappeared into Colombia and was never heard from again. Classified files remained untouched for decades. During 1970s congressional investigations, the scope was deemed too sensitive for public revelation. Only in the late 1990s were portions finally declassified, even then, with most identifying information redacted. Today, the land remains under federal ownership as part of a wildlife preserve. No markers indicate a community ever existed. The mercury contamination has been neutralized, but the government maintains ownership to prevent archaeological investigation. Medical advances from the brothers' research have saved countless lives. Modern understanding of mercury poisoning, industrial safety protocols, and neurological treatment methods trace origins partly to Quicksilver Creek observations. But the ethical cost continues to haunt institutions that benefited. In European medical schools, students occasionally encounter references to mysterious 1880s American research. Professors know only that it was conducted under frontier conditions with minimal ethical oversight. Perhaps the most disturbing legacy is influence on subsequent government research. Techniques for controlling unwilling subjects, manipulating community psychology, and concealing human experimentation became institutional knowledge. The complete truth may never be fully revealed. What remains is a mystery challenging our understanding of scientific ethics, government accountability, and the price of medical progress. The Kruger brothers achieved their goal through methods violating every principle of medical ethics and human dignity. They advanced human knowledge while demonstrating depths of cruelty justified in the name of scientific progress. Their legacy is written in classified files documenting both achievements and crimes. They succeeded in creating knowledge that has benefited humanity, but at a cost no ethical society should ever be willing to pay. This mystery shows the line between medical progress and human exploitation is thinner than we might believe, and that institutional secrecy can preserve both valuable knowledge and horrific crimes for generations. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or do you think secrets remain in those classified files? Leave your comment below and share your theories about what really happened in Quicksilver Creek. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves dark historical mysteries. The truth about American history is often stranger and more disturbing than we could ever imagine. There are countless other stories waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next video where we'll explore another forgotten chapter of American darkness that science refuses to acknowledge.